Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning or good evening to some of you who might be in a different time zone. Welcome to the ADB Water and Deltares Seminar Series, collaborating on innovative and sustainable solutions for integrated water management. Apologies for the few minutes of delay due to some technical difficulties. My name is Junko Sagara. I'm the Water Resource Specialist of the Southeast Asia Department at ADB. And I will be moderating the webinar today on behalf of the ADB's Water Advisory Team on water-related risk and resilience. As you may already know, this webinar series with total of 5 webinars is organized by the ADB Water Sector Group in collaboration with Deltares, an independent Netherlands-based knowledge institute. And in this webinar series, Deltares is sharing its expertise and tools to facilitate innovative and sustainable solutions to address the important and critical issues of water management. Today's webinar is the part 3 of the series of 5 webinars, and we are honored to have Dr. Marjolijn Haasnoot of Deltares to present on the dynamic adaptive policy pathways and climate adaptation. We live in an increasingly unpredictable and uncertain world. And as we speak, the world is experiencing extreme climatic events that we haven't experienced before. And it's becoming increasingly important to consider how can we make a sound investment and policy decisions under this uncertainty. Today, Marjolijn will be discussing an approach to support the development of an adaptive pathways plan that can support decision-making under deep uncertainty, and will be illustrating its use for climate adaptation and climate resilient economic development. Marjolijn is an environmental scientist and is the initiator of the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach. And her research focuses on adaptive delta management and planning and climate change adaptation. She's also a lead author of the 6th assessment report of the IPCC. So Marjolijn will be presenting for about 30 minutes today, and after which we will have about 30 minutes of Q&A session. If you have questions or comments, please insert them on the chat box. Or if you wish to speak up your comments later on, you may do so by clicking on the raise your hand function on Zoom. So thank you very much. And over to you, Marjolijn. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. So I will talk about an approach that can help to make decisions under uncertainty. And there is quite some uncertainty about the future. There's climate change, and we know that the temperatures will rise, but the extent that temperatures will rise is still uncertain, and the consequences that it will have on, for example, sea level rise and coastal erosion is uncertain. We know it will happen, but the extent to which it will happen is still uncertain. There's floods and droughts as a result of natural variability, but will also increase due to climate change. And in addition to that, there's all kinds of socioeconomic developments like population growth, aging population, and this, of course, will have an impact on the space available and for example, the water management that is needed. And then there's this growing cities that need to be protected, or at least need to adapt to these changing conditions. So when there is large uncertainty, like a logic response is to reduce this uncertainty. But decisions are being made every day or every year, and not all uncertainties can be reduced. So we need to deal with this uncertainty. And if we don't do that, we might limit ourselves in the possibility to adapt in the future. And we might take decisions that we regret later. And also we miss maybe opportunities that may come in the future. So it's important to address this uncertainty, not ignore it, but face it and consider potential futures and anticipate these potential futures. So under uncertainty, an approach to deal with this uncertainty is to make robust plans, robust in the sense that they are able to address multiple futures, but also plans that can be adapted over time. So an approach to do that is the Dynamic Adaptive Policy Pathways approach, DAPP in short. And that's a more like a stepwise approach that can help you to identify short-term actions. And each of these actions have a certain threshold beyond which they are no longer sufficient. And then you explore different sequences of actions. And that will result in different pathways. So each of the actions, each of the decisions that you take, they also have a certain threshold. And this may help you to identify low regret actions in the near term, and that are able to help you to achieve your future goals, but also to prioritize actions, because often not everything is possible as a result of different resources. And you also would like to address what are these robust and flexible measures. So in general, an overview of what is different from this approach to other policy analysis approaches or integrated water resources management. So a lot of that is similar, but what it adds is the concept of the adaptation pathways. So a visualization of these potential pathways is here on the left, and I will explain that later. And then there is this stepwise approach. And there is this book with different approaches for decision making under uncertainty, within which this pathways analysis is part of that. So you can look at these different chapters. So if you Google for this book, Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty, I can also send the link later. That's an open access book. So the steps are summarized in this graph. And what you see is that it starts with typically with the description of the system, the objectives, but also the uncertainties. And then assess what are the vulnerabilities and opportunities. And we use that to identify these thresholds at which additional measures are needed. And we call these thresholds adaptation tipping points. And an adaptation tipping point is when you kind of fail to address your objectives, but you can also look at opportunity tipping points that kind of give an opportunity to adapt. For example, because of a change in law or regulations, that could also be an opportunity to implement measures. So then you have your list, you have your vulnerabilities and opportunities, and you can identify different actions, and each of these actions also have this adaptation tipping point. And we try to identify these in terms of conditions, and then use scenarios to assess when this may occur. And then you can explore different alternative routes to achieve your destination, to achieve your objectives over time. And based on that, you can identify in step 5 the adaptive plan, and which exists of like short-term actions and the long-term options, but also what to monitor to detect signals of changing conditions when implementation of follow-up actions is needed, or maybe when you need to reassess your plan. So that's when you start implementing the plan, you also monitor, am I still on track? Or are there changing circumstances or new insights that we need to consider, which can either mean that you need to implement your plan, or maybe think about different types of actions. And I will give some examples about this. So if I go into detail on this adaptation pathways map, which is kind of the core of what is different from other policy analysis approaches. Well, you see it here, and well, one element is the change in conditions, which is on this axis, and here are the options to adapt. And you see in the current situation, with change in conditions, at some point you fail to meet your objective. So that's when you have this adaptation tipping point. But then you can kind of switch or add different actions. In this example, you can add action A, B, C, or D. And you see that each of these actions also have an adaptation tipping point. That's the conditions under which they are not sufficient anymore. So, for example, you could start with the current, after the current situation, you could switch to action B, but then already quite soon, this action already has this adaptation tipping point, and you need to switch to action A or C or D. And then it's up, yeah, you can look at the trade-off between the lifetime of this action, how long will it last under the different scenarios. So here you see the change in condition, could be sea level rise, and the different scenarios of when these conditions can be reached. So under low amount of change, the differences between the scenarios is often not that large. So action B could be also considered, yeah, as a regret option already, because already very soon you need to add different actions. So you might decide, well, maybe switch from the current situation to action C. And then what you see is that in the low end scenario, this is sufficient for the next 100 years. And only in the high end scenario, you need to switch to additional actions, for example, action D or A, or maybe combine it. That's why we have this dashed two colors line with action B. And then you can look at, evaluate all these pathways. And this is just a simple scorecard, which for each pathway, you can look at the cost, the benefits, but also the co-benefits. So there's different trade-offs that you can consider. And of course, this can be done more sophisticated. So we have a paper on that, which looks in more detail on different economic assessment approaches to evaluate adaptation pathways. And what's different from traditional evaluation method is that it helps you to consider transfer costs, which are the costs of switching to different actions. For example, if you build a levee along the river to contain flood risk, and at some point you think I need to widen the riverbed and remove that levee again, then you have already investment and there are some transfer costs. Another example is that when there are socioeconomic development, so more people start to live behind the levee, it's more difficult to switch to other options like this widening the riverbed because there's no space anymore. So there's this kind of path dependency of your decisions, and you would like to keep these options open as much as possible. But of course, there's costs and benefits to that, so that you're able to address that by exploring and evaluating these different pathways. But then you have to consider also these, path dependency also the costs of the path dependency, so we often follow a phased approach. My background is also on environmental modeling, but what we see in practice is when we apply this approach, it's also a different way of thinking. So since I think now 10 years we apply this approach, we often also start with more like awareness raising, like what does this approach mean? How different, socialize yourselves with this way of thinking. And we use a game for that. It's called the Delta game, and you can see some information on this website. And that also helps to see why it is important to explore different pathways. So in this game, the participants are a manager of a region, a delta, and they need to make decisions while there is uncertainty about the future, and then need to negotiate within their team, but also with other teams. So you get this, participatory the definition or design of the plan. And what you see is then they need to make sequences of decisions. So they actually, explore a single pathway, and then by exploring one pathway, then we evaluate and they discuss what happened and what they could have done better. So once we've done that, we often start with more like a light analysis, or sometimes we call it a level 1 analysis, where we explore narratives of pathways, more like qualitative, explore what could happen in the future, what are the decisions that you could make, and what could be a sequence of decisions, what are alternatives. And that helps you to identify the requirements of the model and the further analysis. So then you can do a more quantitative design of pathways, for example, with more like simple models, and then a more full assessment of pathways. So by following these different levels, that helps you to focus in your assessment, but also if there's not that much resources, you can start with a first assessment based on different narratives or studies that are or have already been done, and you can use that to make these narrative and explore the different sequences. So we'll now go into the different examples. So since in the past 10 years or so, several regions have already applied the approach of dynamic adaptive policy pathways, not only by Deltares, but the approach is taken up by different governments and different consultants. And here are some examples of where the approach has been applied. In red are the case studies, and in blue I also show where there have been some guidances developed, where the pathways was taken up as an approach in their existing policy analysis approach. So we'll zoom in to Miami, where we've done a case study. This is the county of Miami, and this is the region of the case study, which is a coastal urbanized region, which is exposed to sea level rise, and of course when there's a lot of rain, it's more difficult to drain the water to the sea. So what we've done in that case study, it was a small study. We worked together with a local consultant and with the water board and the city. And in two workshops, we looked first at the vulnerability and the opportunities, and then we had a workshop where we explored different pathways, different sequences of actions. So here you see several of the stakeholders, and my colleague here has this kind of map table where we try to draw the different pathways. We used the pathways generator tool, which can be downloaded freely, and there is some videos on how to use it. We then also, others used pencils to explore the different sequences, and based on the narratives, we identified different portfolios of measures. And because if you have a large set of measures, there's many pathways, but then the trick is actually to identify these different portfolios of measures, because often you always need a set of measures. So that's what is drawn in this picture, and that was used based on the narratives. We identified which measures we would like to model. Of course, we modeled the situation without measures, a situation with local flood mitigation measures, which exist of local flood walls, drainage canals, and local pumps. And then a more like regional flood mitigation measure with a large pump that drains the water from the catchment to the sea. And then some land use measures, which exist of raising roads and buildings, which is actually quite common in this region. And we looked at that for different amounts of elevation. So then we started to model the water system with some hydrological models. We looked at different rainfall scenarios, storm surge, different amounts of sea level rise. So we modeled the whole catchment, and then we looked at the damages, with a model that uses the water depth and damage curves to assess the expected annual damage. And we also did that for different adaptation options. And then for each adaptation options, we looked at under what conditions would we reach an adaptation tipping point. So to determine these adaptation tipping points, you need to identify these thresholds, which is often difficult and ambiguous. So, but what we did here is, let's assume we don't want to the expected annual damage to increase. So we want to contain the flood risk to current levels. So that was the threshold. And then we looked at the sea level rise, the expected annual damage, and we simulated that for different amount of sea level rise, which are the dots here. And what you can see in the current situation, M0, without any measures, we have the current expected annual damage. And then with the local mitigation measures, the green one, you see that this threshold is exceeded with 0.5 feet of sea level rise, and with land use measures, this is reached at 1.56 feet of sea level rise. And then you can assess when this may occur. So we use, we explore the amount of sea level rise, and we use different scenarios to assess when such a tipping point may occur. So this 0.55 feet could occur in a low sea level rise scenario in 2045, and in a high sea level rise scenario, it's already in the next 5 years. So you can see that this measure has a very short lifetime. And then the land use measures, they have a much longer lifetime, and they will reach their tipping point in 2050. So we did that for all the measures, and you can see here again the amount of sea level rise, the different measures. Here you see the land use measures, and these are more like the structural measures. And you see here the length and the tipping point at which the measure reaches, at which sea level rise this measure reaches its tipping point. So this is again, I think it's this one, the half feet of sea level rise. And then you can draw the pathways. So the current situation is current accepted annual risk. You can start with implementing small local of a regional flood mitigation measures, and then you can increase them. You can make all kinds of combinations. And the main lesson from this assessment is actually, as the participants preferred the structural measures, we showed that if you combine all the structural measures, it's not sufficient. It may be sufficient on a low amount of sea level rise and can take you up to 2060. But on their high sea level rise and beyond 2060, other measures are needed. And the land use measures are needed in the end. But of course, these land use measures, it take a lot of time to implement them. So an adaptive plan could be to install pumps to buy some time, and in the meantime, facilitate the community buyout. Some people adapt the buildings. So another example that I would like to give, because it has some different adaptation pathways from the Netherlands, where we have the approach adopted in our national water management plan to adapt to climate change. And this is a figure that is in the plan. And I wanted to show this figure because it shows, again, here the different scenarios, but it shows actually short-term actions, mid-term actions, and long-term options. And another difference with the other pathways is that the other pathways were assessed for one actor, and here what they try to do is the upper range is the national government. No, the other one. The upper one is the regional government, and the lower sequence of pathways is the national government. And then so together this pathway actually exists of measures for the local government and the national government. And it has a limited amount of options, while more pathways were explored. After evaluation, they only put in the plan this limited amount of pathways. And in their experience, they had this iterative and participatory process. In their experience, the approach helped to open the solution space, because they were kind of forced to think about different sequences of adaptation options. It's actually in one workshop, they mentioned that they had this kind of tunnel vision in their measures. And these measures were good for the short term, but they also realized at the long term, we need to open and widen our solution space. And it's good to consider that now, because due to population growth, these options may not be available in the future if we don't act on that with spatial planning, for example. So another example, and also a different approach to explore these pathways, is what we call a policy hackathon. So it's a hackathon. It's like what these computer nerds do, if I say that. But then with different stakeholders, with different experts, we try to hack the system in a short period of time. In a way, it's similar to a workshop, but we also try to do some back of the envelope calculations and real assessment of potential options and different sequences of measures. There's a short video that was made by my colleague of a policy hackathon that we did together with students, because we also wanted to involve them in this assessment. And this assessment was done based on a signal. So based on monitoring and new insights on potential sea level rise, we try to look at how good was the adaptive plan that the Dutch government made. What are options if sea level rises much faster and higher for the Netherlands? And so we made this plan in 2050, and then in around 2017, this new publications on sea level rise became available. So we wanted to reassess the plan. So we explored the solution space, and like in this, different strategies with protecting the coast with a closed system. So we would need, in the very long time, we would need to pump the rivers, or an open system, or with islands for the sea, with a new coastline, which is advanced, or more accommodate and living with water measures. And in the hackathon, and also with some follow-up studies, we assessed the different options, different measures, and we used that to kind of explore these different pathways. So this is a visualization of the result of that study. And what we made is different narrative in the what are key decisions that need to be made. So examples would be, for example, here our current storm surge barrier would need to close a lot. So we could delay and still use these storm surge barriers by changing the water levels to close them. But at some point, that's not sufficient anymore, so we could accommodate more or close off the barriers. But there's also all kinds of other developments that could trigger your pathway. An example of that could be that for the advance, where you have the islands and a new coastline in the sea, a trigger for that is that at the moment there's quite a lot of people that have plans for these islands in the sea, and there's parties that want an airport in the sea. So all these kind of not climate related developments could also trigger one of these pathways. So this is an example where we worked on also together with my colleague Chitu, who's in the call on an adaptive flood risk management plan for Thailand. And we focused on Bangkok. And for the Yong River, we looked at different options existing of raising embankments, but also bypass or diversion of the rivers, and more like upstream actions with reservoirs or flood retention areas. But what you see in this pathways map is that many options are needed, and there's more. It's more a way of prioritizing the measures instead of like choosing between the measures. What we also did in this study was we didn't use sea level rise or river discharge, but we looked at risk reduction, and that was an idea to consider both population growth and climate change, like changes in the water management system, to consider that in one pathway map. So I'm almost coming to an end. I wanted to mention that what I see now, what is happening in the world, and this is from a Nature paper which came out earlier this year, is where they see that there's all these upcoming climate hazards that happen during that they expect to happen during the COVID-19 pandemic. What we see is actually there's more often this kind of sequences or compound occurrence of events which even challenge our decision making more. But it also results in this crisis situation, and then we tend to make decisions under time pressure, but these could be crucial decisions, and these decisions could influence your future options. And on the one hand, they could kind of lock down the solution space and limit it, and there's less space or ability to adapt. On the other hand, it could be seen as an opportunity to consider the long-term need to adapt and to consider more like climate resilient development. So there's all kinds of tools that we use to apply the approach. I already mentioned the Serious Delta game, some flood risk modeling, the pathways generator. There's also the adaptation support tool, which helps to identify different measures in cities. And there's more like integrated water resources management tools that consider catchments and different trade-offs between different scenarios. I think Ilke van Beek, my colleague, is also in this school, is using this approach quite a lot. And there's different risk analysis tools that consider networks. So the pathways approach can be used as itself, but can also be incorporated in other policy analysis approaches. So here are some examples of studies that we worked on for the World Bank, where we incorporated the pathways approach in ERARM guidances. There's the CRIDA approach, climate risk informed decision analysis from the Army Corps and UNESCO that also have like a very detailed guidance on how to do risk-based pathways. And there's also in New Zealand, there's this national guidance on coastal adaptation that also considers adaptation pathways. I wanted to mention the Society for Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty. You can see it on this website, which is like a community where different people exchange experiences on approaches for decision making under uncertainty. And then to summarize, I tried to explain the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach, and explain how we can use this concept of adaptation threshold or adaptation tipping point to assess if new measures are needed, and use the scenarios to assess when this may occur. And then you can explore these different pathways to make an adaptive plan for climate resilient development. I did not touch a lot about the time scales, but yeah, you can see that there is this lifetime of decisions, and of course you need to consider the time needed for planning and implementation. I've explained that there's different levels of assessment, from narratives to more like model-based pathways, and the approach can be part of other planning approaches. So with that, I give it back to the facilitator for questions.
Thank you very much, Marjolijn, for a great presentation. It was very informative and interesting, and we see that the dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach can be used for the national level planning, policy planning, as well as very localized interventions such as flood protection that you have presented now. And we would like to open the floor for questions. And I see that we already have some questions that are inserted in the chat box. So maybe I will read it out from the first one. We have a question from Pete Harrison. Question is, implementing traditional plans and policies in water resources management can be difficult due to the number of competing stakeholders and overlapping institutional mandates. The GAPP approach is clearly trying to be flexible with various scenarios, but how have you overcome implementing more complex planning tools in multi-stakeholder environments, particularly interested in ADB developing member countries? Marjolijn, would you be able to respond to that question, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I think in these kind of situations, you can use different participatory approaches. For example, in Bangladesh, we use the approach of collaborative modeling, and different stakeholders exploring pathways together, but also exploring the pathways together using the collaborative modeling. So also building a model of the system together and testing these models together with them. Yeah, I guess, but maybe it's also typical. Our background is that we then explore pathways together, and maybe also highlight or what are the crucial decisions of the different stakeholders. So in the Netherlands, we also followed this participatory approach, and we highlighted the different sequences of actions for different stakeholders. In Bangladesh, in the end, like one adaptive plan was developed, but that took quite it takes time also to kind of develop that together. Yeah, but and I can't say it's easy. Yeah. I hope this answers your question. If I don't know if Ilko or Chitte is on the call, if you want to add to that, please also help with that.
Okay. So I think I answered the question. Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, so we'll go on to the next question. We've got a question from Tamzin. How is the issue of political terms and relationship to strategies and plans managed changes in government and be very disruptive to the implementation of long-term and medium-term initiatives?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, what I've seen is that, of course, yeah, my focus is quite a lot on more like the environmental side, and I'm aware that I focused on that also in this presentation. But we work also together quite a lot with people that have more expertise in governance and finance. So an adaptive plan can never be implemented if you don't address the governance and the finance issue as well. So yeah, what I've seen in other case studies is, for example, in New Zealand, in more like a local case study, the communities, they agreed on an adaptive plan, but then in the end, they had this worry that the plan, that the adaptive plan in the end will not be implemented. And as there was money available now, they wanted to implement everything at once and not in an adaptive way. Although they supported the approach, they had this worry about the finance. And then what you see then, for example, in the Netherlands, is that the commitment of the plan and the finance is also put in the law, so that we have multiple years of finance available. So that's a different way of dealing with that.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe we'll move on to the next question. We've got a question from Deb Gautam. What challenges do you face while applying this tool, and how do you overcome such challenges to refine the pathway?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, it always takes a bit of time to kind of, yeah, socialize with the approach. But once that is there, we often have a few like local change agents that explain the way of thinking in local countries. And what we try to do is yeah, empower people with all kinds of tools which are freely available. With these tools, with like the game and examples, we have training. And so that's kind of in the start. Other challenges that I see is when people identify different measures, you get this huge amount of measures, and then it's like, what are, yeah, key strategic pathways? And then it helps to do an iterative approach and make portfolios of pathways, show the pathways, evaluate them, and improve them again. So when I show these pictures, there's many different pathways before that were made. Now they look simple, but in the end, it's also this real assessment that needs to be made. Yeah, other challenges I think is, to what extent can you monitor and wait? What's the value of monitoring and linking it, I think, to developments. I think that's also very important. Not only look, for example, at the environmental changing condition, but also considering development goals and how can you reach them under changing conditions. And then I think the whole issue of an adaptive plan that also considers how can you enable implementing the plan, the finance and the governance and the stakeholders, and monitor and track that the plan is also implemented in time and has the right effect. That part, yeah, there's a few case studies that have done that, but of course the approach is also quite new and that is still under development, and we are exchanging experience between different users on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got a question from Jeff. You have shown some examples based on sea level rise. How complicated does this approach get if we add another dimension, say increased rainfall intensity?
Yeah, good question. It becomes more complex, of course, but the example of Miami was actually also considering a change in rainfall intensity, but we incorporated that in the sea level rise scenarios because they were not that they fitted in the sensitivity analysis. We have a similar issue in a case study in Lake Charles in the US, where we also have this extreme rainfall and sea level rise, and then also we have sea level rise as one of the main drivers, and consider like a sensitivity of the tipping points around with rainfall. The example for the Young River in Thailand was combining population growth, economic growth, and river discharges in flood risk. So yeah, in that sense, I cannot give one way to do this, because actually in every case study we consider what is the best approach for this. I hope this answers your question, Jeff.
Okay, Jeff, is that okay? Let's move on to the next question. Okay, so we have a question from Shivakoti. Okay, very informative. How this approach could help to deal with uncertainty on predicted scenarios. Alternatively, can it be used to identify realistic scenario?
So if I understand the question right, it's like, how can you use this approach with the different types of scenarios? Is that
Shivakoti, would you like to
Yeah, can I
discuss?
clarify?
Yeah, sure, please.
So
Thank
what
you.
I mean was the scenarios usually come from models, but they are full of uncertainty. And one of the problems that local governments who has to implement these adaptive measures face is how they can make a realistic scenario. So my question was whether, I mean, from the approach is based on scenario to address the scenarios, but can we use the adaptive approach you have presented also to filter out the different scenarios given by different kind of models? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, interesting question. Well, in particular, for example, I've been working quite a lot on sea level rise, and there's quite a lot of discussion on the amount and the uncertainty and which projections to use. And then I think this approach helps to look at the conditions under which you have under which you reach a tipping point and explore pathways, and then use as much scenarios if you like to assess the timing. So for example, what we've shown is that for some amounts of sea level rise, it doesn't matter which scenarios you take. The range in the timing is very small, and then only for high amounts there is this difference in the decision. So this could be a way to deal with these many projections and which one to use. You can also turn it around. This is the sensitivity of my system, and for some scenarios it doesn't really matter. There's not that much different in the decision that you would take in the end, and for others it may be sensitive, and then you can consider like, can I monitor and can I wait until I know more, or do I want to make an adaptive plan that also considers a particular scenario? I hope this answers your question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next question. We have a question from Tamani. Can this adaptive pathways modeling be used to make decisions on investment on infrastructure development and insurance?
Yeah, it can, and it has been used in that sense. I think with infrastructure, of course, there's also this challenge to consider, flexibility and adaptiveness of infrastructure. But I think if you follow this approach, it also helps you to look at that. For example, with levees, you can build a wider levee and then raise it to one level and then raise it to another level in the future if needed. But by making this larger base, you enable the option to implement it, to raise it in the future. I know in San Francisco they have a reservoir which is also built to raise in two other stages to increase the reservoir capacity in the future. And then again, they made the foundation such that they were able to raise it 2 levels if needed. But you can also think of more like a staged approach, like considering spatial planning, where you have don't allow developments in certain areas where you, when there is space available, you move infrastructure. So it's a different type of strategy.
Thank you, Marjolijn. I think the question also was asking about the use of this approach in insurance, maybe like disaster insurance. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I haven't done that myself. I know. Yeah, insurance, of course, is one of the options. I don't know. Maybe it affects the evaluation. Could be something to explore. I don't work that much on the insurance myself. My colleagues do. I guess it could be one of the options, and then you can in your pathway, and then you can evaluate the cost and the benefits and compare it to more like infrastructure measures. Could be something to explore. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Marjolijn. Okay, so I hope that answers Tamani's question, and we'll move on to the next one. We have a question from Carol. Generally, there is a larger set of objectives you try to achieve at the same time. They might, for example, be technical, environmental, and economical. How do you apply the pathways approach in a multi-objective situation?
Thank you, Carol, for your question. Well, actually, all applications have been multi-objective, but there's kind of this limited minimum objective that you want to achieve often. There's also, you could, like flood risk is often like a core objective, but then there's additional objectives that you can explore in the evaluation of the pathways. There's also people that have looked at multiple objectives to identify an adaptation tipping point. There's a whole group in the US that use this multi-objective optimization approach. This is a model-based approach to also explore different pathways under multiple objectives and then show the trade-off between the objectives.
Okay, thank you, Marjolijn. Okay, so we'll go to another question. Okay, we have a question from Selena. In undertaking this approach, could they include the use of local or indigenous knowledge and solutions?
Yeah, I think so. If you can specify the measure and assess the effectiveness of this measure, I think you can use that. As long as you want to, it doesn't. Yeah, you want to have like a assess the different options and assess their performance, and you can do that maybe relative to each other, or you could do that with models. Do you have an example of what kind of measures it would be?
Selena, would you like to elaborate on your question?
Hi, I don't have actual examples, but I'm just interested in how to use different types of information that aren't sort of maybe quantitative and looking at more qualitative information for water resource management in exploring sort of ideas and solutions, and how to consider information when looking at issues like sea level rise. I'm thinking particularly in the Pacific and things like that.
Yeah, okay. What you could do then maybe is make these kind of narratives where you have these sequences of actions, and then you kind of assess from expert knowledge, like this could be a first measure to do, but that will not sufficient for the long term, and then you could identify a follow-up measure. And I think by doing that you can also
Grundwasser, wie heißt es? Muss ich gucken. Das ist ein Grundwasser.
Hello, sorry, could you please turn off your, yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, Marjolijn, please go ahead.
I think this narratives approach could be valuable in this situation that Selena mentioned. It might be useful also to talk with Judy Lawrence from New Zealand. She is also more in this indigenous knowledge, like this local situation with local people. We also have a colleague that worked, did some pathway studies in the small islands, and they also use both narratives and sequences. So, yeah, if you want some more information, I can send that to you.
Okay, thank you, Marjolijn. I think Elko van Beek has provided some supplemental comments on the comment box. Would you like to elaborate on your comment, or? Elko,
Yes,
over
yes.
to you.
Well, what I answered is that in the modeling approaches that are underlying this pathway analysis, we are using a collaborative modeling approach. We try to use that local knowledge to involve them in the actually data collection and application of the models. That's why we use it in particular.
Okay, thank you. We are already approaching it's already 4 o'clock, but I think we've got a couple more comments. I think we have one comment from Noel. Okay, so I don't think it's a question, but would you like to speak up, or should I read, Noel? Okay, the comment is, the presentation is extremely helpful and highly relevant to ADB's investment planning in our Pacific GMCs. We are currently undertaking a multi-hazard analysis for the main island of Tonga and are hoping to include an adaptive pathway approach in the integrated urban planning process, which is to follow. I will reach out via email. So yes.
Yeah, Junko, apologies.
Yes.
I couldn't unmute my microphone.
Okay, go ahead.
But this is something that we've already been discussing in part, and had already some discussions with GCF about a potential collaboration on an adaptation pathway approach within Tonga. So I'll definitely reach out to Marlon and would like to get some collaborative work going, particularly on the detailed steps of such an approach. So it's really, really helpful. Thank you for arranging.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you for your comments. And it's great to see that it's really becoming, being used in ADB interventions and projects as well. Okay, so, and we've also received a couple of comments asking for the materials that were shared by Marjolijn. I think there are some good examples, and further information would be very useful. And I believe the presentation will be shared with the participants. But there are some comments that are made regarding whether some of the reports that you presented earlier, such as the one on Thailand or Philippines, or that would those be available for people to access, Marjolijn, or?
Well, I have some
Yeah.
reports available, and also I can send the links to these guidances. For Thailand and the Philippines, I need to check with the client whether that is possible, but I can ask that, or maybe Chitta, you can, maybe you know already if it's, we can share that. Not sure if he's still in. Yeah, there's definitely some reports that we can share.
Okay,
also
thank you.
For the ADP, yeah.
Thank you, great. Okay. Okay, so we are already past 4 o'clock. Are there any more questions? Urgent questions that you'd like to ask or raise? Okay, so I think we have covered all the questions that were put in the chat box. And since we are already past 4 o'clock, we would like to close the session now. Thank you very much all for participating. And thank you, Marjolijn, for a great presentation. And we really appreciate the active participation or the comments that were raised by the participants for a fantastic discussion. And as I mentioned earlier, I believe the presentation will be uploaded and will be shared with the participants later on. So thank you once again, and please keep safe and healthy, and thank you.